You see it everywhere, right? Eat this, don't eat that. This food causes cancer, this one prevents it. The headlines are just relentless, and honestly, they're completely confusing. It can feel pretty much impossible to know what to believe. So today, we're going to try to get some real answers. It really is the big question on so many of our minds. I mean, how much control do we actually have? Can the food we eat make a real measurable difference in our risk for something as serious as cancer? Well, that's what we're doing today. We are cutting through all of that noise. We're going straight to the source, a huge, really powerful scientific review that pulled together the absolute best evidence we have on plant-based diets and cancer. But before we jump into the flashy numbers and the big conclusions, we really need to look under the hood. We need to see how scientists got these answers, because this isn't just one study they did. No, it's something way more powerful than that. See, the paper we're digging into is called a meta-analysis. The easiest way to think of it is as a study of studies. So instead of just relying on one piece of research, it goes out and pools together all the data from lots of different high-quality studies to find the overall trend. It's kind of like taking a massive, super accurate poll to get the most reliable answer you possibly can. And the process here was, well, it was incredibly thorough. The researchers started by scanning almost 3,000 scientific records. From that huge pile, they zeroed in on 17 key publications, and that allowed them to combine data from 7 major long-term studies. The final analysis, get this, included the health outcomes of over 600,000 people. That is a mountain of data. So after sifting through that entire mountain of data, what's the verdict? What did they find? Let's start with what the science says about vegetarian diets. Okay, so here's the big headline number. When they compared them to non-vegetarians, people who followed a vegetarian diet had, on average, a 13% lower risk of developing cancer. Overall, that is a really significant reduction. But where does that number come from? And this is where it gets super interesting, because that protection isn't just some vague average. It's linked to very specific cancers. I mean, just look at stomach cancer, a 45% lower risk. That's huge. For non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, it's 24%, and you can see these major reductions for pancreatic, bladder, colorectal, and others. The data points to some very specific and pretty powerful benefits. Okay, so that covers vegetarians, but the study went a step further. It looked specifically at people on a vegan diet, excluding all animal products, dairy and eggs included. So how did they do? The number for vegans was even more pronounced. The analysis found that vegans had a 23% lower overall cancer risk compared to non-vegetarians. So that's a pretty big jump from the 13% we saw for vegetarians. But, and this is important, there's a really critical piece of context we need to add right here. So here's the deal. It all comes down to the strength of the evidence. While that 23% number for vegans is incredibly promising, it's based on fewer studies. So the researchers graded that evidence as limited suggestive. For vegetarians, on the other hand, there's a much larger body of evidence to draw from, and for several cancers, that link was graded as probable. So what does that mean? It means the conclusions for vegetarianism are considered more scientifically definitive right now, while the research on vegan diets, though exciting, is still emerging. This all leads to the next logical question, right? Whether it's 13% or 23%, a risk reduction is great, but why is it happening? What's the actual mechanism at play here? So let's try to unpack that. What's actually going on inside the body? Well, the researchers identified a bunch of potential reasons, and it really seems to be a case of multiple factors all working together. So there are a few key pieces to this puzzle. A really big one is just having a lower average body weight, or BMI. Then you have what these diets don't include, things like processed and red meats, which we know are risk factors. And of course, there's what they do include, way more, fiber, fruits, and vegetables. Then, if you go even deeper, the science points to things like lower levels of certain growth hormones that can fuel cancer cells, less chronic inflammation, and even healthier gut bacteria. Let's just focus on that body weight factor for a second, because this is fascinating. The researchers were actually able to quantify its impact. They figured out that differences in BMI could explain about 22% of the protective effect they saw in vegetarians, but for vegans, it explained a massive 42% of the effect. This suggests that maintaining a healthy weight is a huge, huge part of the benefit that these diets might be offering. Okay, that was a lot of data and a lot of science. So what's the big takeaway from all of this? What does it actually mean for us?
First, here's a really crucial piece of context. The researchers themselves pointed out that all these numbers are likely conservative. They think they're probably on the low side. Why? Because these studies only measured what people were eating once, right at the very beginning. But people's habits change, and other research shows that when you account for how long people stick to a diet, the protective effects actually get even stronger, so the real benefits could be even greater than what's reported here.
So let's just quickly recap the key points. The best evidence we have shows vegetarians have a 13% lower overall cancer risk. The emerging evidence for vegans suggests an even bigger 23% lower risk. And these links are particularly strong for specific cancers like stomach, colorectal, and breast cancer. So the ultimate conclusion here isn't necessarily that everyone has to become a strict vegetarian or vegan tomorrow, but that the science strongly supports a shift towards eating more plant-based foods. And hey, don't just take it from me. This is it, straight from the authors of this massive review. They conclude that their findings support a beneficial role for these diets and provide, quote, further support for recommendations to adopt much more plant-based dietary patterns. I mean, it doesn't get much clearer than that. So it really leaves us with a final and pretty empowering thought. While no single diet is a magic bullet, this powerful evidence suggests that the choices we make every single day, the food we decide to put on our plate, it might just give us more power over our long-term health than we ever thought.